wrestlers help us out as well. We set up a tent, so to speak, down there on 4th Street. And when things are a little bit slow, Teague was there, of course, and he's helping as he always does. And some people are asking questions about Scotland. And Polly happens to overhear him answering with things like Greenock, and Glasgow, and Paisley, and the Queen Mary, and Airborne, and jumping out of C-47s, and 6 times landing in a Waco, which means you'd be dead, by the time you do that. And then taking a train to and from Alberson, I think it is, down in the south part of England, going over to the Havre, which is basically like Hiroshima at that time, in late 1947, had been bombed out. It's on France, just on the left flank of the landing beaches. And we thought, who is this guy that did all this stuff? We didn't know he was airborne. We didn't know he was that much involved in the war. I was thinking, the only story I heard is we helping people get on to the Queen Mary to go back. The non-ambulatory, but still the litters and such, the wounded going back to get better care than they could get in Europe. So I don't know a whole lot about this, but T does, and he's going to tell us. And let me arrange my stool here with the illustrations, and I will hand him the microphone and try to follow along with him.
Can everybody hear me if I talk this loud?
Yeah.
Can you? Okay, I'll just do it without the mic. Tell you a little bit about when I went to England and then Scotland in World War II. And we'll make it short, but there's some things we'll try and show you as we go along so you get the idea. I left on Christmas Eve from the port at New York and took the USS Washington, which was an old wooden ship from World War I. And it was so old that it was so dangerous they put it in the middle of the convoy. But I was the forward gunner there as we went over to England. So it was a really rough trip because it was in December, and it was so rough that when I looked at the ship next to us, I could see the opposite side of it. They were rolling that much side to side. So it was an interesting trip, and I was seasick most of the way. We landed in England and were shipped to an estate called Aldermaston. It is now a nuclear facility, but then it was an estate by the Joint Chiefs of Staff right there at that building. While I was stationed there, we were staying in Quonset huts, and I was with a young group because we were all 18 years old. And so along came 2 lieutenants, and these 2 lieutenants, I said, you, 8 of us, follow me. So we did, because we were just privates, we didn't know any better. So off we went, and we went to Salisbury Plain to a glider unit. And if you have ever been to Columbus, Indiana, and seen their the front end of a glider like I flew in, why, there is one there that you can actually see in real life. So I joined the glider unit. The first thing we did is we learned to jump, and I jumped twice. The first time I was so afraid of heights. I've always been afraid of heights. And so I froze in the door, and the jump master kicked me in the rear, and I just bounced out. The second time we flew, I knew I was going to be afraid, so I ran out the door, and mine was pumping with my arms and legs going down. But we landed okay, and so I did my 2 jumps, and then we did 4 night flights, all at night. We're in this glider, there's 8 of us, and we're having a 40 millimeter with us. Unfortunately, whoever loaded it did not understand that the 40 millimeter that was used to blast out pillboxes, that's what it was all for, was right behind us but not strapped down. So when we landed, it just rolled right over top of us. And so it was a whole new experience. But that's one of the things that was different. And after that, suddenly our original staff from the unit I was in to begin with came over and said, "You've been Shanghai. You got to come back with us." And so we were not supposed to be there at all. They were just getting ready for Market Garden, which was a big thing over in Holland. And we were going to be a part of that, but we never did go there, the 8 of us. So the thing we did is we took the train, and the train went from Aldermaston up to Glasgow. And you probably see the route there on the map. You may want to tell them where that is. Listen. So it was like a 2-day trip to make it.
Just for a second here, because Lord Elgin gave me a lecture on this once. Of course, Glasgow, we know that. That's like the competitor of Edinburgh, the culture, university, whatever. These guys are catching up.
So we landed at Glasgow, and then we were stationed at Paisley. So there's the 3 main communities there are Glasgow, Paisley, and Greenock. Now Glasgow, at that time, was pretty famous, still from way back in the 1700s. In the 1700s, it had a lot to do with making the people that formed our 13 colonies came from that group of area. And you can talk more about that a little bit later. But the important thing was, in Glasgow, we liked the town, except at night, it was under blackout. So you kind of felt your way along the street, because it was pitch dark, not even the candle was burning. Because it was a major dock at Greenock, which is right next door. And in Greenock, the Germans were trying to get rid of that because all the ships that came in there carried all kinds of armament for the troops. Yeah.
This for a second, this is on one of the walls. If you see the little legend up here, there's the German bombs. The white bombs are incendiary. You see how many white were creating fires. Red ones are high explosive. Blue were delayed high explosive to penetrate the ground and go on deep enough to get bunkers and such. Yeah. And you can see it's like a shotgun because the Germans didn't have a whole lot of loiter time there for their aircraft. It's on the other side of Scotland, of course, from Germany and France. So they were basically bombing line because these guys had their lights turned off. And it was blackouts and they didn't know for sure. They knew something's going on, but knew exactly where it was. So that's your shotgun distribution. Whereas actually they're up here and they're being brought in by, as Polly's uncles, you may remember Ben spoke to us here a few years ago, went over the Queen Mary in these smaller boats because Queen Mary is much too big to go up the estuary here. Yeah, that's the right one.
Okay. A little bit more about the train. As trains are not like ours here where there are seats one after another. There are little compartments where 2 seats face each other. Each seat holds about 3 people. And but as I looked out the window, I realized just how desperate they were at that time because they'd already been in the war since 1939, and here it was 44. So what happened is that they were growing vegetables right up within 6 inches of the rail that we were on. That's how desperate they were for food. So, very interesting. In Glasgow, I said it was famous because a couple of things happened in Glasgow that affected us all. Way back when, a fellow by the name of John Wick reinvented the modern steam engine as we know it now. And so everything that we use with the steam engines, he invented that. And then another fellow by the name of John Rennie did all about the locks and all the ports and all the bridges that in all of Scotland and in England as well, because he was noted as the better engineer than anybody else. When we were at Glasgow, I was invited out by a family to eat with them. And that was a new experience for me, because one of the first things it said is I started to eat, it says, oh, he eats differently than we do. And so I thought, I was really embarrassed, got all red in the face. And so what they do is they eat with the left fork, the fork in the left hand, knife, and they don't change like we do often. And so I said, you know, you should show me how you do that. So actually, the guy next to me on the right went down into a set of peas, and green peas, and he lifted them up on his knife and ate them that way. I'd never ever seen it, and I can't do it yet. It was it was fun. I had a date with a really pretty lassie from the Land Army. We'll show you a picture of the Land Army. You may remember in the old days, the Boy Scouts had little knickers and long socks. And what happened is in about the 19th, we were called in. And we were, from that point on, wore long pants. So I always wondered what happened to it. Well, here we were in Glasgow, and I had a date with a lady in the Women's Land Army, and what did she wear? The old Boy Scout uniform. That's where they all went. They outfitted the Women's Land Army with our Scout stuff. That was interesting to me. But anyway, while I was talking to her, two MPs stepped up behind me and said, they said, private, they said, where's your pass? And I took my pass and went like this. Click. I had a handcuff on me. And he said, you're going to jail. I said, what? And my pass was not signed. In the shuffle, to take care of everybody, he had shuffled me in the bottom of somebody else, and I'm just signing it. So I went to jail on my 19th birthday. And so, interesting jail because all the windows had been bombed out, so they're wide open. We had bars in them, all right, and bars in the cell. I was upstairs, and I noticed that downstairs, here was an old-time type of a wood stove with guys sitting around it, and I was up there freezing. And so I said, gee, I'd sure like to come down there. And they said, okay, come on down. And I just tried the door. It was wide open. So I went down, put my feet up next to the stove, and sat there all night until I was rescued back to my unit. So that was a little different. But it made that date interesting, and I never saw that girl again. We went from there to Greenock to load ships. We were waiting on our armaments to come up and be shipped in at Greenock. And it's a big seaport. It handled big ships like the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth. And that's what I loaded with wounded. And but elevators in those two ships didn't work. So you carried everybody up 3, 4, 5 sets of steps with stretchers all the way to the top. And that was hard work. But we did that with wounded for about a week and a half. And then, so you enter the Queen Mary through the side port, and at the bottom, of course, you got to go all the way to the top with a stretcher. That was hard work. Since there was a blackout, we had to do all that in the blackout as well per night. And they let us loose back about 10 o'clock at night. And we'd find our way back to Paisley to get our quarters. But what I did is I took the shortcut and went to the YMCA. And so I was in the bottom bunk of the YMCA, and we've been eating all day British pork. And when I woke up in the morning, I had blood poisoning. And so I could hardly get out of the bunk, but I finally did, and I staggered out to the street and caught a tram. And you'll see a picture of something like that here. The trams in Scotland never stop. At least they didn't back then. So I caught hold of the bar on the back, but it dragged me along for it until somebody yelled, get him up, and so people ran up and helped me into it. And I went to Paisley to the hospital, and when I got to the hospital, they said, well, you don't have food poisoning, you have trouble with your stomach, and so we're going to operate. I said, oh no, we're not. So I got in the closet, put my feet against the door and held on to the door knob until they finally gave up on me. But it scared me to death. And so that was an experience I would never like to repeat. So I went to the hospital, and they finally did take care of me, and I came back to my unit okay. Our arms arrived, and we loaded them into our 2.5 trucks, and so by that time everything was set. We got our gear together, and we drove down from Glasgow back to Aldermaston. And when we landed at Aldermaston, they completely outfitted us, and we loaded on the boat and left for Le Havre, France. So, let me show you where that trip
left out of Southampton. It was the big port, and then.
Okay. So,
So we left, he says, out of Southampton.
now we shipped out of Southampton,
Now,
went to Le Havre.
if that looks familiar to you, that's D-Day beaches through there.
Yeah. So, other than to say that once we landed out of Le Havre, we didn't stop and get out of the trucks for 2.5 days. We went right to the front. And so, that's another story, and I appreciate what you've heard of. If you had any questions, you're welcome to it.
La Havre, which I didn't know.
But
At the time,
that was
thoroughly
my
bombed out.
18,
John,
19-year-old experience. And so, it taught me the ways of the world. I have something here I'd like for you to take a look at, and I asked a couple people to kind of help me distribute these, if you will.
And Mike has a question for you.
Okay. Yes, so everybody gets one.
T, now, were the gliders that you were training on, they held 8 people?
Yes,
Okay.
8 people and the 40 millimeter.
I always wondered.
When you see-
I thought most
Yeah, when you see the one over at Columbus, you realize how flimsy they are. Most of them crash.